I was recently invited to play an early build of the upcoming Life is Strange double exposure at the Square Enix headquarters in London, and wow, I have a lot of thoughts. Stick around to find out what I've learned about the game, some interesting details I noticed, and the ultimate question: does it deliver on the difficult promise of a worthy sequel to the original indie sensation? Before we get into this video, two things. First of all, I want to say a massive thank you to the team at Square Enix for inviting me to their headquarters to play Double Exposure. The team were really kind, accommodating, and took a genuine interest in both what they do and what content creators are doing. While I did get exclusive access to Double Exposure, I'm not being paid to talk about the game, and so I'm free to give my genuine opinion. Second, most people who watch my videos aren't subscribed. If you want exclusive looks at upcoming Life is Strange content, then definitely subscribe for more. There's some really exciting stuff in the pipeline that you won't want to miss. With that said, let's get into the video. I got to play a segment of the game that lasted around half an hour in total. It's an extract from episode 2 after Max's best friend Safi has died, and Caledon University is in this period of grief. The gameplay segment begins after Max receives a text from her friend Moses, who asks her to come over to his office on campus as soon as possible. When Max arrives, we get the sense that something is very wrong. Moses is sitting outside his office while an official-looking man paces around the hallway on his phone. When we sit down next to Moses, he's visibly agitated and anxious. In a whisper, he tells us that he's in possession of a piece of stolen police evidence in Safi's murder case. Her camera, the very thing she was holding when she was murdered what seems like just a few days prior. He seems to have taken it for innocent reasons, wanting to see the last picture she took of the three of them together, but not everybody seems convinced. We get the sense that Moses is extremely anxious about being viewed as a suspect in Safi's murder case, and when the other man comes over to talk to us, we find out that his worry might not be so unwarranted. This is Vince Alderman, a detective on the Vermont police force who is overseeing Safi's case. While Alderman grills Moses and Max, she comes to the realization that she has to get the camera out of the office before Alderman can acquire a keycard to get in and find it himself. Of course, with the detective standing right there, Max can't ask Moses where the camera is. She'll have to use her new timeline shifting power alongside her puzzle solving skills to find the camera before it's too late. What follows is a pretty challenging, intriguing puzzle and exploration section where we can learn so much about Moses and his relationship to Max and Safi, but we'll get into that later. We use our powers to shift between the two timelines, discovering information from one Moses about where the other Moses might keep his contraband. After finding the camera and navigating through a pretty intense stealth section, we get out of the office with the camera and Moses' innocence intact. But we weren't entirely sneaky. Detective Alderman senses something strange after seeing an object phase in and out of reality as Max transports it to another timeline, and he pulls her aside into the office. He asks her to promise that she'll provide him with any information she knows about who might have the camera or anything else in the case. He stresses that not doing so could get her into huge legal trouble, and we get a major choice. Do we fear Alderman's thinly veiled threats, or do we stand our ground and support Moses? It's a tough one to make without additional context, but I'm interested to see how this plays out in the final release. After that, I have no idea what happens, because that's where my demo of the game ended. So we'll start with the most important thing besides Chloe, which we'll get onto very soon, but what about Max? What was it like playing as the game's returning protagonist again after 9 years? Seeing Max in action again felt like catching up with an old friend. It was really surreal to hear Hannah Tell voicing her again almost a decade later. From the moment I started playing, I felt the stark difference between the Max we met at Blackwell Academy and the woman we play as now. The girl who was scared to talk to her teacher or nervous about making friends is completely gone. Max is something of a mentor figure at Caledon University now, and you can tell that over the years she's really grown into herself. Max is characterized by her strength and bravery in the face of adversity, and that hasn't changed here. She's funny, more confident, and less afraid to take up space, but she still has the same exact roots as her 18-year-old self. One of the biggest examples of this is shown through her thoughts versus her actual dialogue. While Max has always been kind of funny and quick-witted when she's looking at objects and interacting with things, her dialogue in the first game was very stunted and shy, like she wanted to say more but didn't ever dare to stray outside of socially accepted boundaries. In Double Exposure, her thoughts and what she actually says are never really filtered that heavily. In this way, we can see that Deck 9 haven't really changed Max's character at all. Rather, the Max we meet at Caledon University is an evolution of the girl we once knew. From the moment she meets Detective Alderman, she's assertive and dominant in the conversation, very ready and willing to defend her friend. She knows what to say, how to put herself forward, and she has a real spirit about her. Compare this to how she acted the first time she met David Madsen in Chloe's room. She was nervous, quivering, and Chloe had to stand up for her. Life experience has changed Max. She's now spent nearly 10 years as a fully formed adult, and it really shines through. Also, I mentioned Max being funny before, but oh my god, I have never heard her be this soft sarcastic, dry, and witty. Everything you look at in the world, Max has something funny or relatable to say about it, whether it's an anime poster, Moses asking her for help, or even just congratulating herself for figuring something out. Deck 9 allows Max to have really comedic, light-hearted moments, and it's lovely. But this is Max Caulfield, and while she's far better at socializing now, she's got one fatal flaw, something she still hasn't let go of. Max has always had anxiety about her past. It's the whole reason she became so obsessed with changing it with her rewind power. Her social blunders, tragedies in her life, and the successes of her enemies. She used her power to cancel them all out. She beat her predatory photography teacher, she saved lives in the storm, and she even managed to decide the fate of an entire town. But just because Max got rid of the consequences of these actions does not mean she erased her experience of them. From reading Max's texts with her parents, she's oddly cold and distant. She hardly contacts them, and whenever Arcadia Bay, Blackwell, or Mark Jefferson are mentioned, she just clams up and won't talk to them. I played in a version of the game where Chloe was sacrificed, and so in this timeline, Mark Jefferson would be a known convicted predator, which Max's parents know about. Over text, they ask her if Mr. Jefferson ever touched her, or spoke to her inappropriately, and Max denies that he ever did, because it's true. Technically, in this reality, she never ended up in the dark room. She erased the consequences of being drugged by her teacher, but the memory remains. Max is a survivor of a predator. She is a victim of the dark room just as much as Kate Marsh or Rachel Amber, but unlike Kate, she can't testify or prove it. In fact, she can't even talk to anybody about it, because again, it technically never happened in this reality, and people would just assume she was crazy. I talked in a previous video about how I was really interested to see how Deck 9 would tackle Max's trauma from the first game, because she went through a lot of it, and so far I've been really impressed with the echoes of her trauma that resound through her day-to-day life. Even though Max is quite happy on the outside, she seems to have lacked stability ever since the events of the first game, and wanders from place to place, ignoring her parents and taking pictures of abandoned buildings. She's a woman on the run from her past, just like she was when she left Arcadia Bay and Chloe when she was a child. Max has not figured out how to confront her past properly yet, and it makes her deeply uncomfortable. I really think that this is a theme we'll see explored more in Double Exposure. I'm absolutely gripped by the idea of seeing Max work through her trauma and acknowledge how bad it really is. I was also absolutely captivated by Hannah Tell's performance. I believe this is the first time she's ever fully motion captured and voiced the character, and it really makes Max's whole personality shine through. Hannah Tell is Max. She's talked at great length about how important the character has been to her life and how dearly she holds Max in her heart, and this really shows in her performance. The character models and facial animations are able to capture a level of nuance and detail that we've never seen in a Life is Strange title yet, and I found myself completely enthralled in the characters throughout. Now, I also wanted to talk about Pulse and Shift. Pulse and Shift is Max's new power, which has entirely replaced her rewind ability from the first game. Pulse works as a passive ability that the player can use while walking around, where Max will extend her arm and get a glimpse into the parallel timeline, the one where her best friend Safi is alive. We as the player can explore this environment and use the power to see what's going on in the other timeline. In some places, the barrier between the two timelines is weakened, indicated by what looks to be a portal, and Max can actually travel into the alternate reality from these spots. This is called shifting. Now, shift is really interesting because it combines elements of her previous power while still feeling entirely new and unique. It changes the way you interact with the world significantly, and there's actually a lot of nuance to how it works. Obviously, we're seeing a very early version of her power as it's developing and taking shape for the first time. We know from previous Life is Strange games that these powers tend to get stronger over time and can even manifest differently. For example, in the original game, Max manifested the ability to go back in time by months or even years at a time through photos. In Life is Strange 2, Daniel's powers went from lifting rocks to causing massive explosions. In True Colors, Alex progressed from reading emotions to being capable of manipulating them. I imagine we might see a similar evolution for Shift in this game, but for now, here's what we know about her power. One of the more interesting things about Max's power to me was how much it impacted gameplay. There is so much you can do with it. You can listen in on conversations you're not a part of by switching into the other reality and using your pulse ability to eavesdrop, which is really interesting. Puzzles feel far more interactive now. You'll have to be creative about the information you leverage across both timelines. I feel like the gameplay segment I played showed this off really well. We're able to talk to a more at ease version of Moses in the other timeline, who'll be more forthcoming with information and tell us us what we need to know, which we can then use in the original timeline. Don't worry, if you're a bit confused by this, so was I at first. Shift also introduces a part of Max's power that was explored briefly in the first game, but wasn't given much focus. Max can transport objects with her across the two timelines. For example, in this section, Moses will ask Max to find an Allen wrench for him before he'll answer her questions. Max knows the wrench is halfway across campus and she's on a limited time frame, but we can use our pulse ability to see that in the other timeline, it's right on the table. So it's as easy as finding a shift point, grabbing the wrench, and shifting back. Simple. But for the first time, Max's power isn't invisible to those around her. She can't just rewind and make somebody forget that she stole their keys right in front of them. She has to be a bit careful. Shifting in front of somebody would look like she just appeared out of thin air, and taking an object into another timeline might look incredibly suspicious to anybody who sees it happen. At the end of the gameplay segment, Max can actually use her shift power to transport something incredibly large. See, in the living timeline, Moses has put together his new giant telescope, but in the dead timeline, he's grieving Safi and hasn't gotten around to it yet, so it's unassembled and blocking the area where the camera is hidden. Grabbing the unassembled telescope with both hands, Max is able to switch the places of the two objects across the two timelines, so grieving Moses gets his telescope set up for him, and happy Moses has to start assembling it all over again. Fair enough, you may not notice objects switching places if it was something incredibly small and easy to misplace, like a wrench or a key, but in the case of something large like this, people are going to be extremely confused as to why huge things are suddenly changing when they turn their backs. And in fact, this is what lands Max in an interrogation with Alderman. He sees the telescope swap places before his very eyes, and gets incredibly suspicious of Max, who is equally as shocked at what she just did. The player is left with the sense that Shift is going to be a far more prevalent part of the overall narrative. Shift actually feels really fun to use. It's so interesting to see the differences between the two timelines and think about why they're different. For example, Moses has the wrench in the dead timeline but not the alive timeline, because he's not been into his office in days. There's a noticeable absence of Christmas decorations around campus in the dead timeline, whereas in the alive timeline, everyone's in high spirits. There's tons of little details that tell us so much about the story and the lives these characters live outside of what's on screen, and more importantly, how Safi's death has had a ripple impact on the whole of campus. In terms of hidden details, there were actually quite a few, and I definitely went looking for them. Max's phone has been expanded from texts to a whole social media platform and notes she's made about various characters, and my god, there are a lot of characters. Some of them we know pretty well already, like Safi and Moses, but you've also got Amanda, Reggie, Lucas, Gwen, Loretta, and many more that I can't even remember. It seems like this game will have a very large cast of unique characters, somewhat similar to True Colors, and I imagine some of them will be background characters, but it'll still be interesting to meet everybody. On Max's social media, 3 people stood out to me. The first being V Chase Photography, which can only be Victoria Chase, Blackwell Academy's Queen Bee from the first Life is Strange game. We don't learn much about her from these posts, and she doesn't seem to really keep active contact with Max, but she still does post her photography. Interestingly though, it seems like Victoria gets less likes on her post than Max does, which is quite a testament to how far Max has come in the art world from her dull Facebook page, living in the shadow of the Blackwell elite. I really hope we get to see Victoria post more throughout the game. I'd love to learn more about where she's at in life now. Next is the Joyce of cooking, our very own Joyce Price, Chloe's mother. Since my gameplay was set in the Sacrifice Chloe timeline, I got to read some really heart-wrenching texts from Joyce to Max, who still checks in on her occasionally to ask how she's doing. She still seems passionate about cooking, however now she's officially retired and posts nostalgic memories about Chloe unwrapping her Christmas presents early. The loss of her daughter is still something that clearly affects her to this day, and we can definitely sense a bit of that over the text that Joyce and Max share. The final standout characters we see in Max's phone are her parents, who, as we've discussed, are both quite estranged from their daughter. They seem rightfully concerned about Max's experiences in Arcadia Bay, and even remark that sending her to the school felt like a mistake. It's hard to believe Max would have had a normal final year at Blackwell after everything that had happened. Losing her best friend, being kidnapped by a man she trusted, seeing Kate try to unalive herself. It would have been harrowing, and I get why she'd be distant from her parents after all of that. Now, before we close out this video, we have to address the elephant in the room. Did I see anything about Chloe in the game? Is she returning, and does she play a major role in the plot? I'll have a proper video coming out soon about my thoughts on Chloe in Double Exposure, but in the build I played, no. I played in the timeline where Chloe is dead, and so the only mention of her was through Joyce's social media. However, I did learn something really interesting that narrows down our understanding of how Chloe's fate will be handled in the game. For a while now, one of the leading theories about Chloe is that her fate will be reversed across the two timelines, that she'll be alive in one and dead in the other. However, this has been officially debunked. I checked both timelines, scoured through all my texts for a good 10 minutes, and I saw no difference. The only difference between the two timelines appears to be whether Safi lives or dies. However, we do know that Chloe is confirmed to be alive at the start of Double Exposure if you kept her alive at the end of the original. Now, obviously, it is possible that Square Enix have altered the build of this game to keep Chloe's status a secret, but I think this might be copium. I don't really think we're going to find out anything about Chloe until release day. The developers clearly addressed this at a PAX panel. They're not allowed to say anything about Chloe at all. However, this doesn't mean I don't have my own input and thoughts about how the developers are going to handle her. In fact, I'm about 99% sure I know how Chloe is going to be handled in Double Exposure. If you want to find out what I think, you'll just have to subscribe and wait for my next video, which will be a full deep dive into the marketing of Double Exposure and why Chloe's such a forbidden topic. You really won't want to miss it. But what did I think about Double Exposure in general? Has my gameplay experience affected how I perceive this game and whether I'm excited for it? I would say yes. I was initially skeptical about Double Exposure's ability to deliver a worthy successor to 2015's indie hit. I fell in love with the original Life is Strange game, and I wasn't sure if I could imagine a sequel for Max that I would be happy with. However, I feel that from playing Double Exposure, the game is really trying to have its own unique identity. It almost feels like a love child of the first game and True Colors, both of which I enjoyed significantly. I am very hooked on the plot now, and the characters that we got to meet were really interesting. I'm very interested in Moses and how his anxiety affects his day-to-day life. I'm interested to see Max and more of her trauma, and I was blown away by the visual fidelity of this game. I felt like my experience with the game was overall extremely positive, and I am very excited for release day. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, be sure to give it a like and comment down below. Are you excited for the new Life is Strange? What do you think of the story so far? Do you think it'll live up to expectations? Let me know. Did you know that you can now become a member on my channel? If you want to get early access to upcoming videos, priority responses to comments, and support me at the same time, you can join our community by clicking the link in the description. With that, I think I've said my piece. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to always take opportunities when they find you, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.